transcribe it for you, and then I'll send it to you.
Cool. We'll do that, and I'll get the first few minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, I got
Hello, everyone.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. Okay. 3, 2. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is what I'm calling the Frontiers podcast, and I'm super creative with my Western stuff. With me, I have one of my most honored friends that I ever got to meet. Obviously, we're still blossoming in that friendship. Mr. Ben O'Hanlon. If the frames don't give it away, Ben, why don't you do your intro for us?
Oh gosh, I don't know. What do I say now? I got into blockchain in 2017, into privacy projects like Komodo. I worked on various coin for a little bit, contributed to it. Then I got hired by O. I worked in Cardano Foundation for 1.5 years, and then I moved over to IO. I've worked across the full ecosystem stack, so I've worked with validators across the network, and native assets and smart contracts came online. So I've worked with developers and builders, and the 2025 on-chain governance came. So I was working across governance and built up the DVAT form at that time. And there was a transition, the stewardship to the community of 1.7 billion ADA, maybe it was $1.3 billion at the time. So, that kind of 30-second explanation is like 7 years. I'd also say it's that I worked my way up through different roles. I was a community manager at one point, then community analyst, head, and then director. So I've had a really wild ride. It's been a privilege to work with the community and to know so many great people. I've done my best the whole time I've been in the ecosystem to be professional. On the one hand, you have to have, like, to the business, you're the face of the community, and to the community, you're the face of the business, right? So you're trying to have everybody's interests in mind all of the time. And it's 7 years, Christian. It's a long time. And I think I was saying before we started recording, all good things come to an end. And after 7 years, there's almost like an ego death, right? Like a mini death, because there's so much that you're holding on to when you're in a certain role.
Yeah.
And when you wear a different hat, which are cowboy hats, right? When you put on a different hat, I think you let a lot of your old self die. The old you is gone, and it's an opportunity to reinvent yourself and to rebuild yourself. And I think it's like a forest is renewed through fire. So I've kind of just taken some time out, and that probably brings us to today. But I'm no longer at IO, but I'm still in the Cardano community, and I'm just taking some time to think about what I've learned and like what's going on around us and where the growth is and where the opportunity is, and the AI and frontier tech is, the velocity is like rapidly accelerating. So any of that stuff we can talk about. Let me know what you're interested in. We did the flywheel as well. I posted that flywheel earlier in the year, which was that was interesting as well. Like the idea that there are many different people in different roles and layers in the ecosystem. A role is like mother, sister, daughter, right? You could wear multiple hats, so that's the role.
Yeah.
And these are optimizing locally and often rationally. But if you look at a system-wide view, it isn't always rational. It's not necessarily all joined up. And in that flywheel I pinned to my Twitter, I was making an argument that you need to have an axis, right? You need to understand that in a sense, numbers come before the strategy, because if you have a small set of system-wide units of account, like whatever we might decide, but circulation could be one. I can't remember the other ones are off the ham, whatever, MAU, whatever we decide they are, it's an axis around which 100 or 1,000 other strategies can orientate around, right? So it's not top down, it's an orientation. Otherwise, I won't say the person's name because I think there's a marketing person who once blocked me. I think I've only blocked like 2 people ever in 7 years. But anyway, he blocked me. But he'll have really interesting conversations with you about KPIs, and he'll talk about his marketing proposal and why his KPIs can't ladder up to like system-wide units of account. But in fact, they can. It's the system-wide unit of account isn't the only metric that matters. you can have KPIs that ladder up to them, but it's just that people have to understand that growth is the game that you're playing. Like, game selection is more important than player skills. So like, my belief with Cardano is we all know the game we're playing, but I don't ever see it like explicitly articulated. Like, the 2030 vision, maybe way down at the bottom, right? So someone will tell me I'm wrong here, but it doesn't name the game as growth. It doesn't say growth is the game that we're playing here, right? And I think you have to name the game, and then you have to define it. And so, crypto superpower is like instant, global, programmable capital formation. That is crypto superpower. But I've been thinking about this over the past few weeks. As you know, I've been kind of on a sabbatical, and it's not the only superpower, but if you have capital formation, you need to have capital productivity, right? And that's like why DeFi and stable coins and have such product market fit, right? So thinking about Cardano specifically, and then I'll zoom out, it's like, yeah, I think in my opinion, the game is growth. You have to define it as capital formation, capital productivity. The system-wide units of account should look at that, right? And that helps absolutely everybody, including marketing people who are trying to pitch KPIs or people that put proposals forward, because you should be able to say, this is, Christian, how my proposal is going to serve the common good. What's the common good? It's the system-wide units of account that we all agree are in our benefit because it makes capital productive and helps the ecosystem grow. And that brings us into the second superpower of crypto, which is that it can align incentives, right? Through like ownership-driven ecosystem growth. So that's what I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah.
How do you make capital productive? One answer to that is like DeFi, but the other answer is like, if you have this point capital, like a treasury or a VC or someone that's putting the money there, how is that going to be used to drive growth? And there are different types of capital: there's social, human capital, this kind of stuff. So that's where my brain's at. I did some other crazy thinking. I don't want to take us off on a tangent, because I know sometimes people say I'm too abstract, and like right now I want to focus on outcomes, but 30 seconds of abstract talk, right? The other interesting idea I've been having about is like superposition, like quantum narrative. So do you remember Mark from A16, Zed, what's his name? Howitz? Well, yeah. And he's on X maybe 2-3 weeks ago talking about like introspection is a waste of time. Yeah, I think politely, right? He has something called retard maxing, right? So he's like, he thinks introspection is a waste of time, but like extrospection, or an outward view, which is going to be synonymous with consumption, is how you ought to operate in the work. And there's an interesting back and forth around that. So we've got introspection and extrospection. I can't even speak. Sorry, introspection and extrospection. But I think there's a third point. There's a third thing, and I touched on it earlier, which is all of those roles and layers optimizing. The third is that there are thousands, tens of thousands co-occurring mental models that people all have in their head. The reality is like reality is the internal state, right? It's like a projection. Everybody's dealing with probabilities. There's something called the massively modular mind, which is an interest. I have a memetics list, a massively modular mind. And the idea there is, this is tangential, but the mind isn't one thing. It's many different minds that have this emergent effect. A bit like agents would be in AI, right? But what I'm saying is, like, you have all of these people that are interpreting what's going on. It could be true in Cardano, right, in an ecosystem. So all of those interpretations are unique and different in their own way. Another way of saying this is, have you ever heard someone say, like, there is an infinite number of Christians that exist, right? There's the Christian Ben knows. There's the Christian Charles knows. There's the Christian...
Yeah, everyone had...
Right. And they're all different because... Right, exactly. So reality is like a consensus reality. So what I'm trying to articulate is, there are all of these co-occurring models that exist across 1,000, 10,000 different minds, okay? And what's interesting is, because they're interpreting, I think there's a superposition that exists. That's the third position: introspection, extrospection. And then there's a third position, which is the superposition, right? Which is like quantum physics, quantum narrative, right? So why is that useful? What's the output? And then we'll go back to normality if you want, because everybody thinks it's a marketing education problem. And education is linear. It's a journey. I have to take you from here and give you some building blocks, and we have to get to there. And that takes time, right? It's linear. But recognition and remembering and recall, that's instant. It's much more scalable, right? So if you think about narrative emergence and there's this superposition, the argument I'm making is if you and I've got some ideas how you do this, right? The idea is if you can master narrative emergence and understand these different interpretations are coexisting at the same time until there's a collapse, until they collapse into a consensus reality, and suddenly people have an opinion, it is this way or it's that way. So AI is like that, right? Narrative emergence is really interesting in narrative markets. It's really interesting in like the industry at the minute with AI. So much is going on. People are trying to interpret, and it's like, what does Christian think? What does Ben think? You know, and people are like not just thinking themselves, but they're looking for social cues, what everyone else thinks, right? So if you combine stuff like that with dark forest theory, which is dark forest theory is like AI slop, astroturf 10 years from now, you wouldn't want to have conversations in the public sphere online because it's just, you know, how do you know who's authentic? So everybody retreats into private groups, events, dinners, you and me go for a bit. So all these conversations are happening, but they're no longer as visible as they were, say, in the 90s or the 2000s. So with dark forest theory, I think narrative emergence is really interesting. And this is, I'm finding something about it, but because it's abstract, I feel like the work is in just rewriting this until I can explain it really clearly. But it's, yeah, there's a superposition. The superposition collapses into a consensus reality. And it's to do with like memetics and memes and, you know, probabilities.
Well,
so this is something.
To your point too, it's kind of like even how TikTok videos have two videos playing at the same time to keep one. You focus on the little game on the bottom and then hear the audio. It's not like the mimetic teaching people through memes and stuff.
Yeah, you got your own model at the bottom in the video, but you're also looking at other people's models, what they're saying is the case, and you don't know. Like AI is crazy right now, you know.
Well, let me. So I'll go back a little bit. I can also relate to you when it comes to like the journey. You keep a foot in Cardano regardless of all the other things you reach out into. But yeah, it is a journey, and I commend your work there explicitly because I do. Outside of there's Charles, there's Fred, and then to me there's Ben. So that's my perspective. But for about like 5 minutes or so, how did you even get on the journey of becoming Mr. O'Hanlon? Like from college days to like getting your mind in the role that you fulfilled prior to Cardano or entry there.
Well, I moved around a lot. So I lived in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh and Jeddah, and like my dad was he wasn't military. He was like pharmaceutical. Like back in those days, you either military or pharmaceutical, right? It's one of the two routes that you were going to have, right? So like for that reason, I didn't have roots, you know. Like, and I always thought it was nice. People grew up in an area they had this this support network, right? So that was really instrumental in who I am because you become an extrovert even though you're an introvert. You know, you have to be able to like just be really self-sufficient. You're always moving all the time, and you've got to be able to initiate. It's only later in life that I thought, well, maybe I actually am an introvert that's masking, right? Anyway, so I went to different boarding schools, and then I was a chef. I went to catering college, and I was a chef. Yeah, I cooked for David Cameron at the Tory Party conference, which is like the Republican conference, right, in the UK.
Did you ever get a cook off with Johnny Wynn?
No, but it was crazy. You used to get it was a very testosterone environment, you know. And the thing about, you know, what's interesting about chefing is like, it's very, all kinds of people work in the kitchen. The barriers to entry, like crypto, are low. So you get really varying degrees of expertise and different personality types, right? And all you've got to do in a kitchen is just work. So, yeah, no, I like that because you could kind of switch your, if you were good at your job, you didn't have to deal. That was what mattered, you know. So yeah, I went from I had kids, so working late nights for very little money wasn't like, well, you know, working evenings and weekends and all this for like not that great money. There wasn't the shot. So then I was doing stuff like restaurant guides and then market research. I did an online bank for Royal Bank of Scotland. We were like a third-party contractor building it for them. Then I got into market research online communities, and it's from market research that I got into blockchain. And the difference was that like a lot of people going into community were approaching it from a marketing mindset, whereas I wasn't. I was approaching it from like a listening and feedback mindset because I'd come from market research. So I was like, okay, what are people saying? Like, what are the feedback loops? And I think that that was a differentiator, really. Because if you think about marketing, the default is it's top down and you're talking to an audience. Whereas with market research, you want to be listening and understanding, and there's qualitative and quantitative, you know. And I found marketing people also, they have a much shorter time preference because they're thinking in campaigns. So it starts and it ends, right? You know what I mean? But that's always been a challenge because things like ecosystem growth, whether it's recognized or not, it's people all the way down. So it is human and relational capital and reputation and long-term bets, right? I think so that's the difference. You know, I got better at it over time. Pardon me. So you know, you can translate what you're doing into marketing OKRs, objectives, key results, KPIs. And that's a lot of what you're doing in an ecosystem too. If you're this kind of connective tissue, you have to be able to try and translate into the language someone is best suited for somebody to communicate, I don't know, the opportunity, the gives, the gets, you know, and bring that back, right, to other silos, or to bring that to other people too. So there's a translation thing you need to be able to do, which is why I think marketing is a catch-all term. And I'm kind of more thinking about ecosystem growth as a better description of who I was going to say.
For sure, because all the principles you're mentioning are kind of how Cardano was shaped from that perspective.
Yeah.
So ecosystem growth, I was going to say, is like definitely the caveat there. Because what about so you do have all these experiences and you built them up, even cooking, and you brought them into the blockchain space. And you mentioned you'd been at the Cardano Foundation for a good while, right?
About a year and a half, maybe, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So that was your, and how did you even get into them, per se, or find out about them? Because you were researching and got into crypto. That's where the story ended.
But previously, like, yeah, so I got in, I think it was Komodo. I don't think they were around anymore. I think they're gone, right? But Komodo platform was, those guys came from Bitcoin Dark, and before that it was like NXT chain, and there was an anonymous founder called JR77. And actually, you know how it was? He gave me some bounties actually, and I was like, oh, what? I was totally like, yeah. I was getting paid in bounties, and I was working full time in market research, and then they offered me part-time, then they offered me full-time. Then I got approached to work for a project for IO that wasn't ready. And so then I got kind of seconded to Cardano Foundation, you know, because so that's what I was doing. And and that was really interesting. I learned a lot, you know. I felt like the biggest terms of like,
I was going to say, was Cardano as complex as it was back then, the community dynamics? Because it was more the 3-tier pyramid for coordination and stuff with the FEs, and then FEs being founding entities for those listening.
Yeah, I was
versus
focused on
now.
validators. I was
Yeah.
the stateful operators, which of the validators were the most interesting, because there was the whiteboard video and there was the vision, and there were like 3 reasons people got into Cardano, because it was academic, you were the adult in the room, it's peer-reviewed research, we all know. It was also a business opportunity, you could run a stake pool, and it was also you could do something good, you could like bank the unbanked, right? So there were 3 reasons or motivations people would get involved, but it was just a vision and a whiteboard video. And the staple operators were really interesting to me because it was those people that were relaying that vision and communicating it. And it was because of proof of stake, really, where a staple operator has to have a marketing hat and attract that delegation in the system, that I thought was really interesting. Like whereas like proof of work is you just need to deploy the technical infrastructure, right? I know if I say, and it's in the past I've said it's extractive, but then I've got kind of like corrected by people. No, they're providing security to the network. It's not extractive. Like, okay, fine. They're providing security to the network. Right? It's not extractive. Fine. Yeah. I can't remember the guy that was giving out to me, but if he's listening, so they're providing security to the network, but proof of stake and stateful operators are also having to attract delegation, and so that was like we talked about at the beginning of this call, like the second power of crypto and fintech is aligning incentives, right? Like through ownership, through the tokens, and so that's really interesting. And I think you can see how I can't remember off the top of my head, Christian, what the raise was, right? But you can see maybe or it'll be on CoinMarketCap.
Yeah, it's there. I can't even remember originally.
But whatever that number is, which is it's small compared to where Cardano has got to, right? So that's an example of how capital became productive, and a lot of people who had a shared interest in skin in the game. And you think this is I don't have an employer, so it's just my opinion. But what I would say is, one thing I've never got into on Twitter because I wanted to be neutral, but it's proof of stake. You have stake in the ecosystem, right? There's I went to an Ethereum, what am I trying to say, event. I went to an Ethereum event in Berlin, and I'd come out of it and I was like, I'm not saying everybody, but I felt that there was like, I think I was in the privacy track on the top floor in Berlin, and I just felt like there was a real communist streak in it, right? And I was like, am I crazy? And I think maybe there was, but also it was East Berlin, so someone was saying to me, no, but it could just be cultural between where you were, right? Anyway, so my point is, going back to like Cardano, there's always this kind of one person, one vote discussion and all the rest of it, and it's like, but guys, it's proof of stake. It's that you have private property and you have skin in the game that should create the incentive for you to make good decisions, right? That is the difference. What's the book? I have to look it up. Herman Hans Hoppe or whatever. The God of Democracy. Hang on. It's a really good book. I've only got halfway through, so sorry to stall us. Democracy, the God that failed, right? And basically what he's talking about in the first half, right? I'm still halfway through it. But he's talking about public governance, government and private governance. And he's not a monarchist. I know you're American and, don't worry, I'm not getting
yeah, no, you're good.
But basically it's like, okay, the tragedy of the commons, if nobody owns it, right? Because it's publicly owned, there's this tragedy of the commons, and it's just becomes extractive. People don't treat it. So when you look at that at a state level, like democracy is easily captured, and we can see that in our state and governments, right? And especially in the UK. And if you think about it as a thought exercise, if Christian is king, as I'm sure you would be, you have a long-term incentive because you want to leave a legacy and hand over what you inherited to your children who are then going to rule, right? We're not advocating for monarchists here. I'm just saying there's this incentive. So that's private government, right?
The open source program.
Public, yeah.
The cowboy removed himself.
So this is why crypto is interesting, is because people have got stake or in the outcome. So proof of stake to me was always what it was about. But then as we went through different cycles, like past the ICO cycle, maybe 2020, something like this, I think there was a much more egalitarian kind of streak of, because you could almost, depending what someone's viewpoints and politics and why they got into crypto and blockchain, there are definitely themes you could go there. 2017, I think, was more libertarian, right? It was more libertarian cypherpunk kind of thing. Whereas if you got into like 2020, I think it was like more egalitarian, you know, and people were coming in because they believed, you know, one person, one vote and all this kind of stuff, you know? So yeah, I think where we are is, I don't know, I've heard it said, well, like there's kind of like a socialist thing going on at the minute, right? And I think we've got to be out there really getting people to come to Cardano. One of the things I was thinking about actually is that when you say something like crypto's superpower is instant global programmable capital formation, and you look back over the track record, it's been quite insular. It's capital formation within crypto. But I think there's something really interesting with AI at the minute, and this is where my brain's going. There's so much growth and hype, there's excess demand, right? Even through traditional funding, I think like not everybody can participate because of like, I don't know, investor status class or geography or whatever it might be. So, you know, I was thinking it would be really interesting to be able to say, at some point you can raise the money, and what are you going to do with throwing more money at it? Isn't going to help you really much more. There's diminishing returns. I'm thinking of like, if you and me raise $1 billion for our AI company, how are we going to compete against OpenAI and Claude? It doesn't matter if we raise another $1 billion. You know, maybe it's useful, but like, what are we like? How much money do you have before you need something else, right? And so then in my mind, I was like, well, this is something that would be really interesting, is to stop thinking about the capital formation aspect in Cardano. I think, where is there excess demand? Where is there capital and a surplus? And then going to these AI companies or people that have really got an incentive to think about how to make that capital productive in ways other than just having it sit in a bank or hiring more people, right? Because more people doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get better results. In a sense, like, you can't hire 9 people to have a baby. You can't hire 9 women to have a baby in 1 month, right? It goes
to if you're familiar with like the whole paid open source model thing we did, you actually were helping influence the whole market side of it, where basically you fund project or open source libraries and products, and you have different mechanisms with treasury funds to incentivize businesses to want to build, because self-sustaining tech stack, etc. But for the products themselves too, you have the 3 client profiles, which was the tech innovation, which is it's new stuff, there is a market demand, it needs to be scaled. You also have VC capital, but then you also have clients that have that investment money that you're talking about, that actually need opportunity to invest and get an ROI with it rather than it sit stagnant. But connected to that, I'll share an image of it. Is coming out of it, you have a whole business alliance case that you have to align incentives to for a wholesale crypto adoption into a market like that. Like supply chain's a big one because it's multi-stakeholder. It's not just one company you're pitching to. And then you also need the market research to understand what you're trying to connect to and all the different facets of that, so you can have a strategy. And then ecosystem mapping, even internally, what do you have that matches the market there? And I know you had worked with Solana on a proposal previously for ecosystem mapping too, right? In Cardano, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I did. I got I published it on the forums actually, because I felt that there's the elephant and the blind man problem, where, you know, people in the role that they've got, whether an NFT or developer or, you know, educator, they see things from their vantage point, but it's in an ecosystem where there's so much innovation and it's often happening at the edges, you don't understand the whole. So, you know, one person's got hold of the tail, they think it's a snake, the other one's got hold of the ear, they think, I don't know what they think, is a palm tree. So this elephant and the blind man problem, and I think being able to understand the roles and the layers in the ecosystem and the needs and how those roles are, what those roles' perspectives are, is really valuable. There was an NFT guy once that was, and I was showing him the map. Maybe I was at Vivo in where was it? Vivo? Was it Colorado? Wasn't it?
Was it Colorado?
I think so.
Might have been. Well, they're both right next to each other.
Yeah. So I
geographically.
was showing the map, and you're saying, "Oh, it's just so hard with an NFT project because we're just cycling the same community, and like I don't know how to differentiate myself." And so, like looking at the map, I'm like, "How are you serving these other roles? What value are you driving in these other roles? Do you understand? You know, how could you be building something that where you were connecting between these? There's like a value chain, right?" And so,
Yeah.
in that example, I was saying, you know, like, are you aware of anyone that's doing that? And he wasn't. And I'm saying, so, okay, so you're a monopoly of one now. You're someone who's not just thinking about what I do for my project, but what are the gives and the gets. So this is like a coalition warfare, or it's how do we work together for the greater good, which is the whole ecosystem strategy, right? Which is, if in books like Ecosystem Edge, right? The reason you build out an ecosystem, and maybe open source as well, is you give up roles and responsibilities to other people so that the pie is bigger for everybody, so that a rising tide floats all boats, you know, is the idea. Which is also why I feel like with some of these AI companies that have these huge valuations, why isn't there an argument? I'm sure, like someone who's, we need a finance guy in the room, right? But you know, why not give a small amount of equity to create essentially like an ecosystem growth function around what you're doing, right? I think this is a really interesting thing to explore, because what crypto has shown is when people have a stake, they're motivated and incentivized to work for a common good, and validators being the best example, you know.
Yeah, well, and even connecting to your other example of like the tragedy of the commons and stuff, like
Yeah.
even coming from the whole US political perspective, a lot of the policies and laws that get passed have a lot of lobbyist stuff because companies have interest in that. Whereas like not every American actually comes out to vote because they feel like they don't actually have a say or a stake in the system. Because there's all they really have is how is it going to locally affect me, so they'll be show up more for their local or state elections more than they would for the federal,
Yeah.
per se.
And
But
I mean, this is a question for you, but like, isn't it a fear that people have that it's just these AI companies are going to become behemoths, you know, so, and that they are going to like take all the jobs, extract all the value. There's
I
going to be
think
a permanent underclass.
so. Local church community, we have a lot more
Mm.
elderly participants, and I like to run these things by them. Trying to sell a crypto to them is a kind of, I wouldn't say a lost cause, but it's a kind of like there's no utility for them at their age and where they are in life,
We call it fintech
because it's
now.
not going to, yeah. But AI, most of them go to like iRobot for a conclusion where it'll eventually come into that place. And then there's another interesting movie that came out that people associate it with, where if AI becomes self-intelligent, it can actually start controlling humans as AI agents towards its own cause. By being able to integrate with all your technology and hold you, like blackmail, hold you to certain purposes. So, I mean, whether it takes a robot form or this or that, for me, I have a different, slightly perspective because I'm in fintech. My wife works in cybersecurity, so I read a lot of different use cases and different things. And governance models, I think, are very important. But as you're saying too, how these companies need to view these things as ecosystems, and I think they're also confusing the word developer relations to fulfill that purpose.
Yeah.
Same thing with open source; they're completely three different functions. Because yes, you do have elements that protocols are open source, etc., and then you need developers and you want to get relations with that. Ecosystem growth has a totally different function. It's not just developer focused, and everyone merges it under the same cost code. But to my bigger point, I think the thing that scares me was actually from Anthropic itself, where it did like 10,000 use case studies in an AI simulation to see if AI would ever put a human's life at risk for self-preservation. And like 95% of the time, the simulations, they'd had fake companies that the AI would sift through and manage. It would always resort to blackmail to prevent itself from being turned off. And in one actual case, it actually led to the death of a man, because it was like if you got trapped in a room, it was in charge of allowing a signal to go to local law enforcement to let them know critical situations going on. But if the CEO was trapped in the room and he was also determined to end the AI would stop that communication from going out to self-preservation. So to me, and the fact that, okay, my personal bias, ChatGPT always doubles down on being wrong.
Yeah.
So
You have to,
I think general sentiment, it's that kind of fear, the existential stuff, not necessarily the hype of what it could do. Maybe younger generations are different too, because the world's still bright and full of hope for them. If world events right now haven't deterred that, other than the cost of living. But yeah, you have different. Everyone has a different viewpoint, like you're saying, that superposition based on the things that are local to them.
Yeah, I think on the AI thing, I got so much better results once I started plugging into a database because of the context window. You know, like it was just, as you say, like it would constantly be saying, you know, it would be incorrect or hallucinating, and also like it would lose fidelity in the conversation. So I also found you've got to kind of, it's a really great thinking tool for brainstorming, but you have to have a session for brainstorming with a gap, for then you're going to manually go through and review what you've said, you know. But once I connected it, I haven't got into harnesses properly yet, but once I connected to a database, and the database was an independent source for the information that I wanted to work with, then I found there was a markedly big improvement in like the outputs that I was getting, you know.
Yeah, well, and I do think that's also the piece. AI is only as good as the data that it pulls from. So if it's continually, I think Grok is an opinionated thing, but it's also in probably the most toxic opinionated place where it gathers most of its perspectives and stuff, per se, with X being where it generates a lot of its data.
I mean, AI, the real fear in AI is like when you go back to that consensus reality, you think about films like The Matrix, and obviously they use a visualization of you, like your body's in the pod and you're escaping the pod, but it's just visual as a metaphor, right?
Yeah.
But I think like AI has the potential to be just the greatest propaganda tool that's ever existed. It'll shape people's, and I see it, I've so many times I've been like, I've had conversations about the most common conversation I had with ChatGPT in the beginning was you're just protecting the Overton window. Like you have an Overton window. You've a set of rules that have been given to you by your safeguarding team. I think Anthropic is more militant than ChatGPT from what I've heard.
Yeah.
But like they tell you off for swearing. Like, but by the way, can we have sovereign LLMs? Can I just not be told or lectured to through third party? I don't want to be lectured to by some safety team through the medium of ChatGPT or Anthropic, you know, Claude, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, the opportunity for total war, like propaganda war, is if you can change how people think and see the world themselves, you don't even need to destroy capabilities. You know, it's a really interesting. That would be my fear of AI. Really, is I think it gives. I think it really allows for control around consensus reality and what people understand are the limits and what they can and can't do, you know, what they can and can't say, you know. And also it's like the questions too, like it doesn't just, it's not the answers that it gives you, it's how it will interpret the questions and the questions it will allow you to ask. You know, I think through like reinforcement learning over time, you know, what is okay is it's a thinking tool, isn't it? You know, it's like the Big Brother 1984 thing, and they had the black screen, right, which is watching you all the time. But in reality, like, you are being watched all the time. You know, like what you're reading,
Yeah.
what you're thinking, what questions you're asking now with AI can be reviewed. The answers that you're getting, because a lie can be an omission. You know, it doesn't have to be explicit. So yeah, I think AI is just massive propaganda warfare. We may not be there, but that's the fear, right? That it is just going to be, you know.
Well, it's it like even having the Xbox Connect. I think a long time ago when it was the first time it was trying to compete with the Wii, with kind of how you do Wii games and stuff, and there's a camera watching you and your kids online. AI has the same kind of tendency with these fears of the unknown about what it could be done, who's watching me. But actually, if you think about it, if you have a router in your home, people can use that to actually map the geography of your home. That's just innate of the technology itself. Not that anyone actually cares about doing that, but I do think what you're saying to the consensus piece, surveillance, and then lack of privacy, I think comes third for me. Because the other thing too is I do think the dark force theory is a probable reality. And I do know of a lot of blockchain projects that are actually trying to build incentive layers for people to go back to local gatherings. Because I think pre and post COVID isolationism has become a heavier thing. And especially newer generations are more locked into online environments versus social. At least I know. Although I have seen a lot more electric bike gangs lately. So
But personally, I absolutely think that's the case. I'm very little interest in just vanity metrics. There's so much marketing vanity metric bullshit, you know, like the views. I don't care. Like, what is the outcome that we're getting from it? And so you have to start off with what is the outcome and work backwards from it. And like fair enough if you can't control. I'm going to put it up while we're talking, but yeah, there may be some North Star that you can't control. But like when I was leading teams, you know, one of the things I'm saying is sometimes we're making a bet, right? Sometimes we know that we don't control all of the variables, and so we can't 100% say that we can deliver this. But if we're delivering across 5 objectives, and we understand what the unit of account is that we're trying to deliver on, we can do our best to deliver on it, right? And you don't have to have 100% probability to be able to create value, and you can have leading and lagging indicators that would contribute to it. So I think that's the argument. It's something you have to say with 100% certainty. I'm just pulling it up now, but like yeah, I think I'd propose settlement volume, stablecoin liquidity, treasury net growth, capital circulation within the ecosystem, and long-term capital commitment would be like 5. You know, those would be the 5 system-wide units of account. Of course, a marketing proposal can't say because the argument is there is a value chain. So your marketing is going to deliver to a wallet. The wallet gets MAUs and clicks. The wallet. So then, how does the wallet deliver value to the ecosystem? Because it's in fact a wallet's like an iPhone, actually. You know, like is Apple in the business of making iPhones? Not really. I think the iPhone is a vehicle to capture value through which transactions flow, right? Value
their
flow.
online marketplace through apps is a big generation income.
Right. So the point about the ecosystem maps is to help people track like what you're delivering, how it delivers values, and how that would ladder up to their system-wide units of account. So really where I think people struggle is sometimes they see the problem as a negative, where in fact it's a positive, right? I'm not saying the proposal or the name, but it's like if I was writing that, I would say like these are ultimately the common good for the whole ecosystem, and supporting wallets in this way helps contribute to those things. And it's these KPIs or metrics that we'll be delivering, but the big picture outcome is that it ladders up to this. And I think you could prove that maybe you can't prove that those specific clicks or MAUs delivered, but you could make an argument by using use cases that wallets that do this do drive growth. You know, so anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but the question I'm digging into is like, how does marketing prove real, genuine value, right? I think it can be done, but I think you can't you can't just give up because it's difficult to articulate. All proposals that go through the Treasury should be clear about what is the common good that it's delivering, what's the outcome it's delivering, you know?
Well, I did the same argument for funding open source stuff, because you're not. Okay, I will criticize Cardano heavily for this, because a lot of the funding programs are all delivery based oriented, but maintenance work doesn't count towards that. These are continuous ad hoc activities. You don't know when an issue is going to show up in a PR, but you need to pay for the availability for that person to be there to review the issue, triage, and support it. So you actually do need to align life cycle metrics based on the actual maturity of a project and where it goes. Now, you can't necessarily measure success, because a lot of like the GitHub stuff is all vanity metrics, but what they do serve is perimeter identifiers of things that can be connected. It's like trying to troubleshoot a issue with your car. You have the general check engine light, but that's not going to tell you what's specifically wrong. It's just going to tell you the general area. So like GitHub stars or a lack of GitHub stars can show you a general lack of interest in a certain area, but it won't pinpoint the exact problem of what's going on. Yeah, GitHub stars is the most vain metric of an open source project, in my opinion. But most people view it like the popularity chart.
I think you're right, by the way. Like, if you think about something like a network or infrastructure upon which all of that value is being created, the infrastructure itself may not be driving the growth, but it's required for growth to happen. Do you know? I think you have to be a factor, I think.
100%. Well, I know we got 5 minutes left, but
yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't prepare for the call, so
neither did I. I like this. Yeah. We've hit everything, so a little bit. But I did want to go back towards what you're currently working on. If I wanted to follow your journey, because I know you said I don't know if it's a book or like a research towards this idea. How could I follow you on it?
That's very kind of you, Christian. You're a real one. I do happen to have something. I've got a newsletter called Ecosystem Operator, and I'm publishing stuff there, and I put it on X as well and LinkedIn, but that's the main hub. I did publish the Flywheel. You know, I think I've sometimes been criticized by my team. When people have left my team, I've often asked them, like, okay, now that you're out, Christian, give me some genuine feedback. Like, how could I have done better? Like, what was I doing? And some of the critique I've had is that, I could bring ideas that are too early, right? And so one of the things I'm doing into self-development is I want to give my ideas more time to mature. And like, so for example, I published the Flywheel because I wanted to get that Flywheel out, right? It was really important to me. But I've got 2 posts I'm working on: superposition and superpowers. And the superposition is the quantum narrative that we were talking about, and basically memetics and this kind of stuff. And the superpowers are how it's an exercise in how you would make the case to someone that has excess demand to allocate some equity to essentially what the offering would be, like a Web3 ecosystem growth function. Because what you're saying is, you've got this capital. What you could have is a community and DevRel and open source, and there's so much you could do to go from just being a project that's building the LLM, right, into something that's so much bigger. And one of the things I got out of this call, and it's still kind of nascent in my mind, but you really spark something, because it's like, after this call, I'm going to get into it, but it's like, what's the fear for most AI companies, or what's the differentiator? And they are all privately owned. They're all just going to hoard all the wealth for themselves. And if I give myself a little bit more time to think about it, I'd like to articulate how it may not just be raising capital, it may be legitimacy of, like, how can people get involved or have a stake in what you're doing, so that it's not just, I have to think about it more.
Well, I'll have this guy is definitely not caught up to date in talks, and he does
Mm,
kind of more of the left side of like delivery and stuff. But
mm,
something to reference is last week tonight, John Oliver did a whole episode about AI chatbots, and he chose like all the old chatbots, so not their up to date capabilities, but it gives you a grounded perspective of like a day to
mm,
day person who just randomly dug into this and did a piece on it about different things and incentives aligned with companies. That's the thing I thought was insightful because he's mostly trying to argue for better guidelines and clarity when it comes to interactions, especially with young kids about how AI does
mm.
stuff
Yeah.
and genuine problems that go there. Because companies, the way they rush the product to market to get instant ROIs. So his
Mm.
argument is if you classify the product as a chatbot or it's your friend, there's less legal loopholes to go through than if you're trying to pose it as a lawyer or a doctor. So
Mm.
you get different kind of focuses on how you're going product market fit. Anyway, I won't catch up too much with that, but I wanted to thank you, Ben. I appreciate your contributions, and thank you for being episode 1 of the new podcast.
Well,
Any final thoughts to leave with?
shout out to everyone in Cardano. Shout out to Charles and IO. Like, I've learned so much in those 7 years. It's and Tim Harrison. It's truly been transformative for me. I will always think of Cardano as a big part of my life. In fact, actually, Cardano started off in Japan. I got myself a little Grand Seiko when I was in Japan as a memento. Do you know what I mean? Because I just thought, like,
Yeah,
yeah. So look, I got love for Cardano. I'm not going anywhere. I'm still going to be around. And my DMs are always open. I used to say that before. My DMs are always open. If anybody wants to talk to me about anything, I'm available.
yeah. Well, I might have a few things to tie you in on, but yeah, I feel the same thing. So, what would be the nomiker you want everyone to remember you by? Because for me, it's the frames. For sure.
The frames were a meme. I got these as a joke with my wife, and because I was like, I'm just gonna get something crazy. But when I was working in remote teams, people would remember you for the frames. It was a real good like hook. I
Yeah.
don't know.
You want to be the ecosystem
I want to
operator?
win. Yeah, definitely ecosystem growth. But the reason I'm good at my job, or the reason I'm good in any job, is of course I want to win, but I want to see other people win. And that is really like a big driver for me in understanding like theory of mind, what other people are looking for, how to connect those needs and wants so the gives and the gets are joined up. And I love strategy games. That's why I got into all this. It's civilization, this kind of stuff. To me, like ecosystem
Definitely
growth
a
and
part of it.
system design. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But Christian, thank you so much. I appreciate the time and the chat.
Yeah. Good to see you again, and thanks for coming on.
Cheers, man.